Happy Moon Day, Collective. Hope everyone's gotten a good start to this Thanksgiving week. Hopefully, you don't have to work too hard. Those of you that are really lucky have already started indulging in the festivities, I guess. Me, on the other hand, am here with my carrot and my green onion and my tomatoes that I harvested from my driveway cafe earlier today. I've got, let's see, 3, 6, I've got 9 really nice cherry tomatoes. So I'm going to cut these up for my salad tonight. I'm going to have some of my beef stew that I made this weekend, but in the spirit of getting my vegetables in and sort of making sure I get those nutrients in before I have my hearty sort of comfort food of the stew, and accounting for the fact that later this week I'm not really going to be worried about my salad. I kind of try to be extra committed to it in the days leading up. Because let's be honest, nobody is going to be like, pass me the salad on Thanksgiving. Although, there's some really good festive salads, like spinach salad with like dried cherries and feta. That's one of my favorite holiday type salads when I really feel like going there. But we're just going to get our salads in the beginning of the week this time. So I want to check in on this moon day, and first start with a correction in the spirit of, like I said, it's moon day, and me being a Virgo moon, committed to the conveying information, conveying good information. I have to go and make a little correction to my last video, Sea Holly and the Mars Cazimi video. And when I went back and looked, I was like, oh my gosh, I told everybody that the transit of Mars is, I think I said it was like 2 years or something, 2.5 years. That is the transit of Saturn. So for whatever reason, I got in my brain at that moment the transits of Mars and Saturn mixed up. To be fair, because they've both been playing like a pretty large role in the transits that have, based on the aspects they're making to other planets, there was a lot of things that Saturn was having, in terms of the feeling, the effect Saturn has been having, as well as Mars. But Saturn's transit is more properly in the window of 2 to 2.5 years per sign. Mars, on the other hand, is way faster. So I think in the context I was talking about Mars and Scorpio, and in my mind, I don't know why I got it jumbled up, because I already know Mars is at the later degrees of Scorpio, and my video on how to channel the energy of Mars and Scorpio wasn't that long ago. So the transit on average is not going to be the same all the time of Mars, is generally it's just somewhere between a month and 2, generally like 45 days ish. So we had a unique situation last year to where it had a retrograde period, and I believe it was like in Gemini. So because of the retrograde, it got kind of caught in the sign of Gemini for a while, exceeding way beyond the normal transit within a sign. And so that was kind of more of the exception. But in general, you're going to find Mars in any given sign for 45 days, much, much quicker. So with that in mind, we're going to be seeing Mars move into the sign of Sagittarius within the week. It's going to be just like a handful of days. I want to say it's on the 24th, maybe on Thanksgiving. Mars moving into Sagittarius out of its one of its home signs of Scorpio. So moving in silence, as Mars in Scorpio generally is, it's going to be a lot. Mars is going to be a lot, I guess, more outward in its expression in Sagittarius. And in the video I did on elements and modalities and group dynamics, I talk a bit more about how the expression of Sagittarius as one of the fire signs, yet a mutable fire sign, how that generally, the archetype generally expresses itself. So, Mars being in Mars being in a fire sign, albeit not a home sign, you're going to generally have the fieriness still kind of there, but you're going to have to bring in the archetypes that color Sagittarius. So the ruling planet being Jupiter and Sagittarius. I've talked a lot about these archetypes and their them being characterized by sort of an optimism and sort of preoccupied with potential and possibilities. And uh, generally, I think it's kind of a fun place for Mars to be. Um, and quite frankly, when I'm sitting here talking about, these little health habits, Mars and Sagittarius is a really good place to sort of get yourself kind of hyped up about implementing little habits, like putting into action little things from a place of higher ideals, your Jupiterian um, desire to reach higher and improve in whatever ways that might look like for you. Sometimes it's like a pattern of thought, and sometimes it's um, a mix of a pattern of thought as well as putting into action things in the 3D world that are good for your long-term benefit and growth. And so when I talk about ideals, higher ideals, that are sort of characteristic of Jupiter and Sagittarius. And then when you bring in Mars, planet of action, initiation, implementation, you see the potential there. It's sort of like, okay, now that I've had this sort of moving in silence period of Mars and Scorpio and sort of plotting out like maybe my vision for myself for the end of the year and into 2024, Mars and Sagittarius is a really good time in the spirit of those higher ideals and possibility, um, is to see what you can't make yourself implement, dipping your toe into one little behavioral change or some sort of little piece of action you can like weave into your daily life, that might make everything else in your life and all of your other goals sort of like unfold a bit more smoothly. So, um, it's funny, in the spirit of that, one of my friends texted me today, and yesterday, I have to say, yesterday and today, like the vibe for me was just not, I mean, it was not vibing the way I wish it was. It was nothing I could point to in particular. And of course, you know me, I'm going to open the Sky app and see what are these planets doing right now, like trying to look for something. And sometimes it's just like, well, there's nothing really new beyond the energies that have generally been going on for this month in general. Uh, and I was just thinking to myself, what can I do to get myself out of this funk? So yesterday, it quite literally involved dangling the promise of like a fun, large caffeinated beverage. The promise of that to me, I was like, okay, you're gonna pull it together. You're gonna go out and like go to the store, get a couple things, and then at the end, you can get yourself like a big, fun, caffeinated beverage, gingerbread, oat milk chai. And so sometimes, it takes those little the carrot, they say, the carrot stick approach. And today, I mean, it wasn't that bad. I mean, I got up and I had therapy today, and I generally look forward to that because it's sort of like a talking out like things like this. Like, I don't know, the vibe hasn't been vibing, but it is what it is. And so I did start the day that way, which always feels like starting things on the right foot, quite honestly. Sometimes it's just a matter of saying these things out loud and then being like, well, sometimes it's easier than others to get up and go through the motions of the day. Like when I say doing the work and just sometimes plugging along and just handling the mundane. Uh, you might not feel totally revitalized afterwards, but you will at least go, well, I've done my best, I at least got that done. So we're gonna leave that carrot over there. See if one of the dogs won't pick it up and get themselves some healthy carrots. I doubt what they usually do is they find something like that on the floor, they'll pick it up and they'll like crunch it around like really awkwardly for a little bit, and then they'll like spit it out in disgust, kind of look at me like, what in the hell is this? Anyway, so going back to my friend texting me, she's been recovering from a procedure, and she had an appointment today and essentially got like the go ahead to increase her movement a little bit more. And so she texts me asking like, hey, doctor says I can do this and that. Do you want to take a walk around the neighborhood? And an old version of me would admittedly go, oh, I'm feeling funky, and it's like this and that. No real reasons, basically, but like it wouldn't have been my natural reaction to go, oh yeah, I'm feeling really just funky. Let me just get suited and booted to walk around outside. Ironically, that's exactly what you should do in those moments. And I have, this journey of healing and therapeutic horticulture specifically, and understanding the benefit of just kind of propelling yourself into the outside regardless of how you feel. In fact, like the more low the vibes feel, that's your sign that like just putting on your shoes, your walking shoes, and putting on a jacket and just walking around outside, even aimlessly alone, is a surefire way to come back feeling a little less funky than when you left. And that's just guaranteed. So I said, when I saw the text, I was like, yeah, let's do it. Like, when's good? And so I pulled out this like cute little jacket that I hadn't had the chance to wear yet this year, this bright blue jacket. Um, and put on my Nike leggings and my just basic white tee, and I just thought, you know what, a walk around in the mid-afternoon is perfect, because let's face it, the sun goes down at like 5 nowadays. So kind of putting yourself outside when the sunshine is still going pretty strong is essential, like now more than ever. So I was really glad this year reached out, because otherwise I probably wouldn't have taken a walk today. I would have been like, oh, well, I got to get through this laundry and I got to get through this and that. And all those things still are getting done. So it just kind of reminds you of like whatever reasons you tell yourself that you can't like make time for a quick little walk. Generally, 9 times out of 10 are just you like making excuses when you really could just like stick the laundry in, go for the walk. By the time you get back, it's, time to put it in the dryer, whatever. So we had a nice little walk, and like honestly, I was not surprised at all to report back that like it helped a lot. I just, aside from just the social aspect of it, so walking by yourself, you're still going to get the benefit of going outside, moving around, and all the chemical things that happen in your body when you do that, and just getting the sunlight exposure. But even if you're walking by yourself, sometimes you pass by a neighbor, and that one little thing I've said about acknowledging somebody just passing by, sometimes you'll wave to someone passing by, or you'll see someone walking their dog and you like pet on the dog, whatever. Sometimes you have these sort of like little incidental social interactions, or just sort of a reminder that yeah, other people are around struggling through the grind too. And it's better to just walk around casually without any real aim or route that you've planned necessarily, just for the sake of getting out there, honestly. And so I was really glad that she reached out and that we did that. And we even said to ourselves, like, we really need to like make this more of a thing that we commit to, like impose upon ourselves even, and even whatever you got to do to get all souped up, like get your cutest athleisure all like laid out and dedicate like a drawer or two to it, and be like, all right, this is like, these are the fun little outfits I'm gonna make for walking outside in the winter, and my favorite little hats and whatever gear that you need to keep warm. Here are my favorite scarves. Whatever you got to do to make going out there in the cold seem appealing, because honestly, it's not just necessarily going to sound that appealing when you're like in the warm coziness of your house. So you got to kind of jog your brain ahead to those memories that, like, oh, remember how good it felt when I went outside that one time, even though the day felt just so raggedy at the beginning that one time, so trying to have these little uh, these reminders, and kind of saying out loud, yeah, this was a really good experience. This whole talk, this whole monologue that I'm doing right now, the next time the opportunity to go outside and take a quick walk comes up, my mind is already going to go back to this whole monologue and go, whatever it is that you're thinking that, is a reason why you can't, remember how good it felt on that Monday, to where motivation to do things wasn't really happening very easily, and just sort of making it more of a habit, instead of waiting for myself to feel like it, because that sometimes, like, that's how you develop good habits. You just take your mind out of the whole equation, because you already know how it will play tricks on you about what is or isn't like a good vibe at that moment, and just apply your logic. Be like, you know what, this is good for you. It's you're not going to feel any worse when you get back, and in fact, you are guaranteed to feel better. So that's my little 2 cents. And I'm gonna try, now that I've said it too on this video. It's almost like I have this built-in sort of accountability system, to myself. I've already said it out loud. I've put it out there into the universe that walking, even in the cold, is going to be a more regular thing this year. Help with that seasonal depression. And another thing, of course, that helps with the seasonal depression is make sure you've gotten your good input. So here's my little, this is like kind of the ritual I do to make throwing the salad together a little bit easier. Probably eat it like shortly after I finish this video. Just like taking a little bowl and putting my cut up tomatoes, my sliced carrot, my green onion, and then I put like 3 spoons of these pumpkin seeds. They're raw and unsalted. It's a big old bag I've had for a while. Goes for a very long time. And aside from being like a great health food product, it's got plant protein, omega-3s, lots of minerals. They're organic, raw. I think I got them on Amazon at one point. Terrasol, superfoods. I like just throwing them on top of salads for the texture. Honestly, it's like, well, if it's going to have these health benefits, and I'm not the kind of person to just grab a handful of raw seeds, no matter how healthy I think they are, and just snack on them. That's just not what I'm going to do. So I try to incorporate it into things I'm already going to eat. So add little 3 spoonfuls of the pumpkin seeds. So that really helps with the texture of the salad when I throw it all together. So we're going to put that to the side. Let's see, I've got, what else did I want to cover? And I wanted to, just as like a little bit of history, this is like a piece from my therapeutic horticulture class that I wanted to lace in. It goes very well with the whole Mars and Sagittarius vibe, and sort of getting the wheels turning in your head, seeing what of this resonates with you, and what you think you might want to implement in your own life. Just give it a try. I mean, anyone out there who has suffered from depression enough probably can relate to the whole idea of like, sometimes when you feel bad enough, or I don't know, sometimes you are even more open to just trying something you've never tried before, simply because you are just aching for a way to feel a little bit less blah, a little bit less whatever. And sometimes it's just the seasonal depression. Sometimes you can feel like you have an easier time. It's easier to gather the tools to make yourself feel better when there's more daylight. But sometimes I might argue, when the sun sets at like 4:45, and the Mars is entering Sagittarius, there's no better time than to just like say, you know what, I'm just gonna do what this girl's suggesting, just for the hell of it. I mean, why not? Can I feel any worse during these cold, dark months? Probably not. So sometimes it's worth doing it just to surprise yourself and go, huh, well, as it turns out, this actually helps a little bit. But in the therapeutic horticulture class, we learned a little bit about the history of the development of the practice. And I'm going to bust out my notebook here, actually, that I took really good notes on. And it's a little section here on mental illness in the 19th century. And we started with talking about the therapeutic landscapes. And there's Dr. Thomas Kirkbride, is generally credited with being part of the movement in psychiatric medicine in the 19th century of moving away from the practice then of a more sort of I don't know, there are a lot of adjectives you can use to describe it, but sort of like treating people more like animals in a cage, like sort of dehumanizing in a lot of ways, the straitjacket approach, the very heavily institutionalized arm's length distance, and incorporating what you might call they call it moral therapy, which was basically an emphasis on removing the restraints, both literally and metaphorically, in terms of the long-term approach to helping people heal. And this this started by the way that the institutions themselves were actually designed. So it's just an interesting how, like, the medical field found reason to sort of bring in like the naturalists and, like, the architects, and try to work together and start designing the actual asylums um, to promote a sense of wellness just in their very design. And this isn't a new principle. I mean, temples and like cathedrals and stuff throughout history have been designed with this sort of like these principles of sacred geometry, and very deliberate like ratios, and like um, you see like the golden ratio, which is found in nature, um, implemented in architectural design. Is very deliberate. And the reason these things were built this way was to inspire awe within people, because it was a recognition of the fact that part of um, spiritual healing, um, standing in the awe of something, and in these kind of like these archetypal images that exist within us. um, Part of that is like the sort of recognition of beauty and like the symmetry of like these natural things in the world, and the formations of like a, a shell, or like in a rosette of a flower or a vegetable, and seeing these sort of things occurring naturally. People in history, when designing sacred spaces, brought that into the actual architecture of these buildings, cathedrals, sacred spaces. So basically, in terms of the asylums, the switch that was made was this deliberate effort to make them sort of like a Frank Lloyd Wright type approach, where you actually let the landscape be your guide. You don't work against the landscape, you work in harmony with it. The whole purpose is to make the building sort of like the secondary part, and the emphasis is on like the natural surroundings and the expansiveness that allowed people to heal, of course, in conjunction with the traditional medical uh, structures at that point, the whatever it is that they implemented, and the medications and all that. But recognizing that the environment within which this occurred was actually an essential part of healing. And I mean, who doesn't know that? So you saw this switch from more institutionalized, sort of sterile look of these buildings into things that looked a lot more like grand estates, sort of looked like a big old house, um, that was spread open and wide, and like had open like courtyards and like to where people could just walk unconstrained, literally without the straitjacket, but also in terms of the parameters of the spaces within which they were allowed to just exist. And how that alone had a profound impact on the clinical outcomes of these patients. And one thing that I found really interesting is it was sort of observed. So, mind you, back in the day, so a lot of these like quotes and like the things that are surrounding it are sort of like, they don't really translate very nicely today. Like a lot of it is just sort of like referring to people in ways that we wouldn't really refer to them today, like as sort of like insane, or under some degree of lunacy or crazed. So a lot of these quotes are sort of like, you kind of got to look past that, and of course also realizing that they're only referring to men, because at this point you've got you're not going to have men and women together in these asylums, and the way men were treated in terms of like getting them well mentally, and the way women were treated in terms of getting them well mentally, were very problematic in terms of the disparate approaches in and of themselves. But that's a whole other conversation. So when I'm talking about some of these things and a lot of these quotes that you hear, you're going to have to look past the limitations of the time, we'll say. But there's this really interesting quote, and it's something that anybody could tell you now when you like uh, ask people about the general levels of happiness that someone feels who like works in an office building, you know, where it's like fluorescent lights, and maybe if you're lucky a window, and maybe if you're lucky a window that gives you a view of something green as opposed to like a concrete jungle. And then you talk to a guy who's like been working outside, like a landscaper all day, or even like arborists, um, the tree guys that come and like remove the limbs, like the levels of reported like satisfaction and happiness that those people have in terms of like after a day on the job, those statistics like don't lie at all. I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise, but the health outcomes and even just like the mental health and happiness in terms of just with your everyday life, people that work outside uh, by and large always report being just happier, having a higher sense of well-being, regardless of like the pay difference. So it kind of goes to show the link I've made before in terms of energy and money being sort of one and the same. So in other words, people that like uh, are happy and they like work with their hands, work outside amongst nature all day, with some exceptions, are generally not recognized as having like the incomes and the level of salary that like somebody, the white collar job where you're inside plugging along behind however many screens. And it's sort of like kind of, I think we're all being asked these days, especially to consider where our value system really is. Like, what's more important to us, the larger salary and like feeling like an absolute drag after a day of work, or having less money but having so much more of your life force, your energy, um, preserved, and like not only that but like almost like fills you up. It's almost like it pays you in a way that goes beyond your paycheck. So in terms of the wealth, the way wealth is measured, and the sense of wealth, your sense of personal wealth, and well-being. This is why I always say, like in tarot, the pentacle cards aren't should not be looked at and treated as just money. It's an energetic resource. Like, how much of yourself do you expend every day, and how much do you get back in return, but energetically, monetarily, um, or otherwise. So I want to talk about this one quote, and it really does sort of highlight how we traditionally look at like having enough money to not have to get our hands dirty, right? So you might look at someone who does their own yard work and go, oh, I'm glad I have enough money to pay someone to do that, right? Or looking at a lot of the people that we hire to do outdoor jobs for us. And to be fair, if you don't do this stuff yourself, because you don't have the extra time, but you do place a value on having like a really nice or maintained or whatever outdoor space, by all means hire someone to do it. Like I would definitely be right there with you. But for a lot of people you see like who take care of their own yard, and they clearly have the money if they wanted to hire someone else to do it, you would argue that there's some other thing that they're getting out of it. So consider this quote. And this, I believe, is a quote by, a Benjamin Rush quote. Now, if you haven't heard of Benjamin Rush, he was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. He's considered the father of American psychiatric practice, actually. He was, among other things, politician, physician, social reformer, an abolitionist. He was anti-capital punishment. So he was very much an outspoken proponent for the shift from the sort of like inhumane straitjacket approach to like mental health into the whole like moral therapy, again, tapping into the higher ideals. These are very like Jupiterian, Sagittarius things. And just like any um, any action that sorts like a change in behavior, it's preceded by, it happens in your head first. It's a recognition of the fact that like um, higher ideal, a place of privilege. If you're one of these like men that got to sign the Declaration of Independence, what what benefit is privilege if you can't use the freedom of like the mental freedom that one has when they don't have to worry about survival to really help not just yourself evolve, but in evolving yourself in these ways, you are thereby uplifting humanity. And most obviously by going out into the world and helping implement things that help to uplift humanity by, social reform and like using your privilege and your voice to sort of push for things that generally tend to give more people get more people out of that survival mode and into like thriving mode to where their higher ideals, they can reach their higher ideals and use their mental power to think along the Jupiterian realm versus like being in the struggle of just surviving and scrapping and getting through day by day. So Benjamin Rush, he was one of the people accredited with being part of this movement and just the general push for uplifting a lot of practices in this country, like kind of advancing us all to be better. And so this quote, it has been remarked that the maniacs of the male sex in all hospitals who assist in cutting wood, making fires, and digging in a garden often recover, while persons whose rank exempts them from performing such services languish away their lives within the walls of the hospital. So think about that. That basically is suggesting that, in order to get a bed at the asylum or get a room at the asylum, get a place in the asylum for like whatever mania you're suffering from, you're probably gonna have to be a man in terms of like the traditional setup and, you know, disparate treatment regimes that would be available to women versus men. But, it's kind of suggesting that a more moneyed person, somebody of higher social status who could get like the room and pay for it all, pay for the treatment, who doesn't have to work in the institution, work on the grounds to sort of help pay their way. Um, those people actually didn't have the kind of outcomes that the people of a lower rank, who their only way to actually get the benefit of the treatment at the asylum was to actually be part of the staff, like was to work on the grounds, dig the holes, cut the wood. Um, and those people had better outcomes, faster outcomes. They um, were by and large seen to be like wild successes in the treatment, versus just the people that stayed at the same asylum, had the same doctors, and were still free to walk around in the open courtyards and enjoy, the nice, expansive grounds. The people that actually like got their hands dirty and helped in the garden and chopped the wood and broke a sweat, um, had better outcomes. And so that's a very core part of the practice, the whole subject matter of therapeutic horticulture, that anyone that loves gardens and gardening, or just like loves sitting by a campfire, loves like, you don't have to chop the wood yourself, but like to gather it, whether it's like your fallen tree branches or making the fire yourself and like sitting there, putting work into the experience of um, just the outdoor gathering is an essential part to your enjoyment of it and getting the benefits of the effects that being in nature um, offers us. So I just want anyone who thinks, "Oh, I'm not like a plant person," or "I don't have a green thumb." I try to remember to bust out the notebook. I want to do that more often because there are these little tidbits that um, I just think would really resonate with anybody out there who thinks that this is just going to be a channel about like, oh, you got to have plants because they're beautiful, and having beautiful plants like makes your environment prettier, and like looking at the colors and stuff really helps like make you feel happy. I mean, that's all true, but there's like a lot more at work, and a lot more things that fall under the umbrella that could bring in more people to benefiting from the subject matter, more than just like, you got to go buy plants, keep them in your house, and remember to water them. There are a lot more ways to benefit from the plant people connection and, the grander cosmic world that we all live in, and the energies that surround all these things that are unseen but very much felt. So it's funny because like the assignment at the end of this unit was to the whole unit had been preceded by like sort of therapeutic horticulture and history, and it touched on like ancient times, and then like in the monasteries during like some of the violent times, and like in European history, where you had like the monasteries and the monks, and they had like their little temple gardens that were meant for not only like medicinal, they would grow herbs, and food for when there was shortages and like people starved during times of war and conflict. And you know, finding yourself a monastery would be not only a place where you might could find some like medicinal herbs or whatever and whatnot, but like the benefit of being in the monastery and the gardens that were prioritized there was considered a part of your like spiritual um, nourishment, especially if in the context of like widespread suffering and war and death, and like which would occur for hundreds of years at a time, well beyond one lifetime in blocks of time in European history, of course. So these monasteries became not just a place for like refuge for the infirm and like getting some medicine, but also like spiritual healing, because the things that you see during times of war and widespread death and plagues and suffering, um, it was recognized that being within the walls of the monasteries where the time in the gardens was very much prioritized, and upkeep of the gardens that's been a common theme in history, like Japanese history, Germanic, all kinds of cultural histories since ancient times. So the assignment at the end of this unit was to research some use of gardens, like in history, that wasn't covered, and it was a pretty like open-ended assignment. And so I chose, Zen gardens, and it wasn't a very deep assignment. It's pretty like a one-page type thing. And one thing that I want to emphasize was Zen gardens. And you think of Zen gardens and you think of like these really like uh, sort of, we're kind of bombarded on social media with like these really impressive, like usually someone that has a really nice home, and it looks like something that was like well curated by some like outside source. They probably are. And it looks like something that you don't really go out and touch almost. It's like, this is exactly just so, and this is just so. But the thing about a Zen garden, it's much more broad in terms of what can be considered a Zen garden than you might imagine. Like, yeah, there are the traditional elements that are said symbolically to represent like natural elements, like the I forget what the word is, but it's like Karen Sensui. It's like the gravel that's used, where you see like people raking. The gravel is meant to be water, and then you see like the raking, which is often done like very, very deliberately and purposely, and like it's its own meditation, and that's meant to be waves, like ripples in the water. And you'll often see like a big stone, which depending on like what the purpose of the designer of the garden was, represent like a mountain, and then like a smaller stone representing like the Buddha, and then like another stone representing this or that, like all these other symbolic objects. And you'll often see like with this one central stone, you'll see like the waves with the rake kind of going um, in circles, like around and around and around, and that's meant to sort of like show the ripples, like from that object. And so there's like a lot of symbolic meaning with the placement of these objects and what they're made to represent in like sort of like the grander scheme of like the natural world. And what I think that is lost on a lot of people with Zen gardens is a Zen garden is quite literally inextricably intertwined with the upkeep of the garden. So, in other words, the whole purpose of the garden is not the aesthetics. The aesthetics are not the thing that qualifies something as a Zen garden. It's the interaction with it. It's arguably like the most intimate form of garden, because the whole purpose of it is to sort of emphasize the importance and the sacredness of the simple everyday tasks of the mundane. And there's nothing more mundane than getting up every day and just dutifully sweeping off, the threshold that leads to your Zen garden, and dutifully like sweeping off the fallen leaves as they start to fall in the autumn, so that you can clear the path to your little like pathway in your Zen garden, and sit there and contemplate. It's your interaction, it's your relationship with this garden that is the Zen garden, and it's quite literally meant to make you contemplate in the Buddhist practice of the way. And anyone's free. I'm not an expert on Buddhism. I've sort of like just gotten a working familiarity with it, and out of curiosity over the years. So I wouldn't be the primary source about like what are the principles all involved in the way. I mean, I could read them off in a list, but anyone that's interested in that, and this sounds like something that would resonate with you and your maybe spiritual exploration, or just like your interest in having a more intimate relationship with the natural world. I would really encourage you, if you want to kind of go down the rabbit hole one day, start looking at like the history of Zen gardens. It's extreme. It's very extensive, and like I think also the benefit of that is you're exposed to more modest images of a Zen garden, like versus like the architectural digests, like highly curated images that you're kind of shown. It's like, oh well, that's like an $8 million house, so yeah, that's nice. But like, the whole point of this channel and of therapeutic horticulture, honestly, is to make all of these things, to make you realize how this is equally accessible to all of us. Like nature belongs to all of us. So um, look it up. I mean, if you're interested, look up the history of Zen gardens. I think you'll find it really fascinating, and like consider how you, in with the resources that you have, like how you could create your own little Zen garden. I mean, you could live in an apartment with literally no outdoor space, and you could actually just get like a little trough, like some shell. I mean, you could get something as like a large dish or a pan, and you could literally create a miniature um little Zen garden with like a little mini rake. I mean, you've seen these things like marketed before, and that sort of defeats the purpose, right? Like the benefit would be for you to build it like with found objects. Like maybe if you have to buy something, go buy a small bag of like gravel or slate pieces. I've talked about permatil. Permatil would be an excellent uh stand-in for the care and I'm going to find the word actually. What is it that I keep butchering? It's Karasansui, or the gravel that symbolizes water. So that is spelt, if you're interested in the like um, history here, Karesansui. You can also use sand, but like if you really want to like go for it, I just think the gravel is better because it also will hold the especially if you get like the slate pieces of the permatil with like flat sides. If you do the rake formation through it, it'll hold, like stay in place easier. Um, it's up to you. Like be creative. Use what's most accessible to you. And then like, gather stones or, small branches with like moss or whatever symbolic objects that you could arrange in a certain way, and create your own little sort of like miniature Zen garden. Just whatever, with whatever space that you have, with whatever materials that you have. And the whole purpose of it being is you being the caretaker of it, and it being something that sort of creates this little ritual for you to interact with these natural things as just part of your daily life. And I would say that the cold, dark days of winter are a perfect time to develop that sort of like one-on-one relationship with like caring for this little, even if it's this little box, this shoebox size of like Zen garden. Just be creative. And there's something very calming in being, the creator, something like putting all this together. Because, part of making a Zen garden is creativity. It's meant to inspire a sort of recognition of your oneness with the natural world. Um, so I'll probably tap more into some of the lessons from this intro to therapeutic horticulture class, just because I think it was just, aside from being a phenomenal thing for me to get through this year and a productive thing to keep my mind engaged, I think it was just like really fascinating and fun. And participating in the group discussions, which an old version of me would be like, oh, group discussions. But in this one context, it kind of like repaired my relationship with learning in a way after law school. like no offense to law school, but like kind of offense to law school, yeah. It it was like I guess I felt a little dumbfounded at how I realized how beneficial it was for me to take a class just for my pure enthusiasm for the subject matter. And the closest thing I had gotten to that was like electives in college, or even law school, but like just seeking out like a class offered um, like this really helped me in a lot of ways that I just didn't even see coming. So talk more about that as time goes, and I definitely plan on taking more. There's like several tiers of it, so I'll keep you guys involved in that journey as time passes and I become more engaged in the subject matter along the way. Otherwise, hope you have a fine Thanksgiving week. I know it's a hard week for people just in general, it's stressful. But if you suffered any kind of loss, whether it's of loss of somebody, a pet, a friend, by passing, or just by like, someone no longer in your life for a different reason, or loss of a job, anything, I understand how you feel, and just know that you're not the only one suffering. You're not alone. There are other people out there that probably feel the way that you feel, and I'm not here to tell you that you can just garden your way out of sadness, but I am here to offer little pieces of things that help make suffering a little bit more bearable for me. So stay tuned if this is a subject that you feel like you want all the help you can get in this subject. I'm definitely somebody who is always open to suggestions. So if you have comments, if you have your own little like piece of happiness um, that you like to implement to get through this season, put it in the comments, because some people coming and they watch a video and more hesitant to interact, they'll get the benefit of that comment too. And you might find that something that helps you feel better is like sharing that little tidbit of yours for someone else who comes along in a day, in a year, whenever, to see. Uh, Subscribe if you haven't. As always, share this with someone that you think it might help, or that may have an interest in it. I'm gonna check back in. I'm gonna check back in before Thanksgiving. I want to incorporate. I'm gonna be doing a green bean casserole, which is like the kind of tried and true, easy, inexpensive side that a lot of people, if you do have a Thanksgiving and you're like, oh, I gotta bring the green bean casserole, or gotta bring the side. I was thinking about doing involving y'all in the one I'm putting together, because I like to jazz it up, So I'm gonna bring in some like fresh herbs and give you tips on like how to like kind of jazz it up a little bit, make it like a little bit something more than just the green bean casserole. Take care until then.